This is not like rain on your wedding day or a free ride when you've already paid. I'm Ruby Carr, and this is the incredible story of Alanis Morissette's classic, Ironic.
You know the songs.
Just making people feel something.
It's been a pleasure to work on this song with her.
But do you know the history?
It's a struggle making any kind of record.
I don't always have the direction or concept.
This is Encore, an in-depth look at the stories behind the music. Here's iHeartRadio's Ruby Carr.
There is no mistaking Alanis Morisette for anyone else. She is the one and only Alanis. And I mean that. Like, can you even think of anyone else out there named Alanis? But not only that, Miss Morissette also has one of the most recognizable singing voices of her generation. One that helped countless heartbroken individuals sing out their feelings. One that helped her sell more than 33 million copies of her album, Jagged Little Pill. Only Shania Twain's Come On Over has sold more copies than Jagged Little Pill, making it the second best-selling album by any Canadian ever. And just for the record, that list includes Celine Dion, Drake, The Weeknd, Justin Bieber, Rush, and Nickelback. In fact, no Canadian male or Canadian band has sold more copies of an album than Alanis. She is that awesome. Jagged Little Pill kinda sorta reinvented the female singer-songwriter and gave women the confidence and strength to express themselves authentically. Rolling Stone called it a landmark moment for the music industry and the soundtrack of a generation. And it didn't take long for that new generation of self-assured female singer-songwriters to emerge in the wake of Alanis' success. One of my favorite online posts says the best genre of music is a woman that's angry about something, and that is so true. But all of that success did not come to Alanis without sacrifices. Alanis Nadine Morissette was born in Ottawa, Ontario in 1974. At the age of 3, her family, which included older brother Chad and her twin brother Wade, they moved to Germany for a few years where her parents taught at a Canadian Forces base. After seeing Grease with her father at the age of 3, Alanis dreamt of becoming the next Olivia Newton-John, to the point where she was reenacting the whole movie for her grandmother. Years later, on a trip to Los Angeles, a 9-year-old Alanis would actually seek out Olivia Newton-John's house in Malibu, and she rang the doorbell. Here she is recalling that experience with the New Music's Janelyn White.
I was 9 years old. I love it. And I went down there, and she had a security gate and a machine that was taping all the people that went by, I guess. And I just went up and went, "Hi, I'm Alanis, and I'm going to meet you one day, and I want to be famous just like you." And I have pictures and stuff, and I remember that moment. It's hilarious.
In fact, chances are you could be more famous than Olivia Newton-John.
I don't know.
In 1980, the Morissette family moved back to Ottawa when Alanis was 6. After seeing local folk singers Jacqueline and Lindsay Morgan perform, she knew she wanted to be a singer and a songwriter. But before she could pursue that career path, Alanis caught the acting bug. So at the age of 10, she was cast on a local TV program called You Can't Do That on Television. Do you remember that? It was a children's sketch comedy show that had become so popular, it was actually picked up by Nickelodeon and quickly became the network's biggest show. In case you haven't seen it, You Can't Do That on Television, it had this running gag that kids loved, where if a character said the words, "I don't know," a bucket of slime would fall from the ceiling all over them. Here is what Alanis getting slimed sounds like.
Alanis, you must have a good idea.
I don't know. Alistair, you did that on purpose. Now I will hate you.
No, Alanis, no, really, it didn't have anything to do with me. I just forgot to tell you that on this show you can't say, "I don't know," or you'll get slimed.
Could you imagine if every workplace was like that? Even though Alanis only appeared in 7 episodes of You Can't Do That on Television, she would learn valuable experience about how to entertain an audience. Here she is in a documentary called Alanis Too Hot, discussing how You Can't Do That on Television prepared her for a life performing in front of others.
The show helped me a lot, just, learning how to be myself in front of a camera and not freeze up. And it was good because acting, especially when you do videos nowadays too, you have to incorporate a lot of your acting skills into them. And it was fun.
The show also paid her enough money that she could fund some studio time to record music. By the time she got her break on TV, she had already begun writing songs. Her mom sent a tape of Alanis singing to Jacqueline and Lindsay Morgan, who agreed to help her record a demo with Rich Dodson of classic rockers The Stampeders. She would release one of those songs, Fate Stay With Me, as a 7-inch vinyl single with another song called Find the Right Man as the B-side. Ah, yes, the struggles of finding the right man. It's something every 13-year-old can relate to. Needless to say, the people around Alanis at the time were pushing the young and impressionable teenager to act like she was older than the age on her birth certificate, but she was turning heads with her voice. She performed Fate Stay With Me at the CJOH Youth Talent Search in 1987 when she was just 13, and guess what? She took home the grand prize. Here is a quick snippet of that performance.
Fate, stay with me. I wanna be free. Fate, stay with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 1987 CJOH Youth Talent Search 87 Grand Prize winner is Alanis Morisette.
Fate Stay With Me also received some airplay on Ottawa radio stations where it was heard by Stephen Cloven, a former professional skater for the Ice Capades. Impressed by her voice, he offered to become her manager and helped her book gigs, singing at events like sporting events and fashion shows. Around the same time, Alanis' mom sent her demo to Leslie Howe, an Ottawa-based musician and one half of the pop-rock duo 1-to-1, who had a radio hit called Hold Me Now to their name. After hearing and meeting the young singer, Leslie believed he had discovered the next big teen pop star and signed Alanis to a deal with his production, Ghetto Vale, for a 5-album deal. All Alanis needed now was a record label to release those albums. One thing Alanis really had going for her was that teen pop had reached a real high in the late 80s, thanks to acts like New Kids on the Block, Tiffany, and Debbie Gibson. Alanis was striking while the iron was hot. In fact, with her bubblegum pop sound, she was often hailed as the Canadian Tiffany or Debbie. Leslie tapped into that appeal and produced a song he co-wrote with Alanis called Walk Away, which they would shop to labels. In order to make it appear more professional, Leslie and Stephen flew Alanis to Paris, France to shoot a music video. She was only 14 at the time, singing about how she would leave her lover if he didn't want her anymore. But the video worked. Leslie showed it to John Alexander, the head of A&R at MCA Publishing Canada, and just like that, Alanis had a record deal. Alanis quickly learned, however, that she was not in control of her music career. She would tell the Ottawa Citizen in 1991, "People are already saying to me, so you're the next Tiffany." Well, I'm not. When it came time to think about an image, all I said is that I didn't want to be fake. But that wasn't the case. Alanis was being packaged like a cookie-cutter pop princess by her management and her label. Soon, she found her label was even making demands for her to join a Weight Watchers program to lose weight and control her diet. According to an article published by Hazlitt, male executives at MCA became obsessed with Alanis' weight, even instructing her to lose 20 pounds. Years later, she would tell Us Weekly, "I recall being called to a meeting at the recording studio and the person said, 'I know I called you to redo vocals, but I actually wanted to talk to you about your weight. You can't be successful if you're fat.'" Alanis would later admit that between the ages of 14 and 18, she had become both anorexic and bulimic from the pressure put on her by MCA. It's just horrible. Because of this, Alanis would become an advocate for mental health when she was older, where she would discuss the struggles she faced from her eating disorder. In the HBO documentary Jagged, Alanis would accuse her then label of kickstarting a massive eating disorder journey, requiring her to be in active recovery for her whole life. The studio environment pushed her even further into a lifestyle that no one, especially a young teenager, should have endured. She confessed that most days after school, she would head straight to the studio, often staying as late as 4 a.m, writing and recording with Leslie Howe. There, the then 16-year-old singer would hang out with adults and experiment with alcohol, marijuana, and began a sexual relationship with a much older man when she was just 15. She would briefly discuss working in that environment with Janelyn White.
The fact that I'm working with a lot of people that are older, it sort of rubs off on me too. Like everyone that I'm surrounded by, there was a point where I was surrounded by adults for about 2 weeks and I didn't see anybody my age for that length of time. So it starts rubbing off on you, I think, a little.
But in Jagged, Alanis admitted, "It took me years in therapy to even admit there had been any kind of victimization on my part. I would always say I was consenting, and then I'd be reminded like, hey, you were 15, you're not consenting at 15. Now I'm like, oh yeah, they're all pedophiles, it's all statutory rape." While she has never disclosed who the relationship was with, there were a few people who knew what was going on, and those who knew either didn't speak up or didn't see anything wrong with it. Years later, Alanis would open up about her experience surviving a male-dominated industry that took advantage of young women in the 2002 song Hands Clean. She would tell The Independent that she was surrounded by people that would constantly exploit her, admitting, "The thing is, a lot of people didn't even realize they were doing it. I could barely fault anyone because so many people who were exploitative, who were using me, they didn't even know they were doing it. But it's all there. All the lyrics and all the stories are all there. I consider myself to be the queen of revenge fantasy, not the queen of actual revenge acting out." Like Destiny's Child, Aaliyah, Justin Timberlake, and Britney Spears before her, Alanis performed on Star Search, a reality competition TV show hosted by Ed McMahon. Her appearance did very little to raise her profile, so her label primarily focused on breaking her in Canada. It helped that MCA had marketed her as the Debbie Gibson of Canada, a nickname that suited her debut album accordingly. Released on April 17, 1991, Alanis, as it was titled, catapulted a 16-year-old Alanis to the top of the charts in Canada thanks to its first single, Too Hot, which was a top 20 hit. That was kind of it for the album, though. Despite a feature in the film Problem Child 2 and a pre-fame Matt LeBlanc starring as her love interest in the video, follow-up single Walk Away failed to match the same success as Too Hot. And if I may, just for a minute, because I know you were thinking about it too, I would like to point out that Matt LeBlanc is 7 years older than Alanis, who at the time was 16, maybe 17 years old. It is wild that happened and that he agreed to it, but that's showbiz for you, I guess. Alanis achieved a lot with Too Hot, which was nominated for both Single of the Year and Dance Recording of the Year at the Juno Awards. She wouldn't win in those categories, but she did take home her first Juno for Most Promising Female Vocalist of the Year. On top of that, Alanis would sell 100,000 copies of her debut album, which in the age of CDs and cassettes was considered not too shabby for a brand new artist. And it earned her other opportunities like opening up for the hit-making rap star Vanilla Ice, although apparently she was told not to look him in the eye. Here she is on Watch What Happens Live telling Andy Cohen about it.
Serena S. texted Alanis, what was your favorite part of opening for Vanilla Ice's tour back in the day in the 90s? And is it true you weren't allowed to look him in the eye?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of artists are overwhelmed by incredible, large amount of stimuli, and I think me looking at him would have overstimulated him. So that
is the best answer ever.
I just averted my eyes.
That is really good. Let's go to
That is cold as ice.
I understand that you're switching that now. You're going to move off in a slightly different direction.
I'd like to. It's not going to say that the next album's going to be incredibly different, but I like to think that this career of mine could last a really long time, so it's going to go through some changes along the way, but I'd like to go in a different direction, slowly but surely along the way.
That was Alanis Morisette talking to the press at the 1992 Junos. Looking to capitalize on her win, Alanis' team wasted no time getting her back into the studio to record a second album, perhaps something even a little different. Around this time, she also began dating actor Dave Coulier, best known for his role as Joey, the lovable stand-up comic on the hit sitcom Full House. Alanis was still only a teenager, 19, but still, he was 15 years older than her. Cut it out. Here she is admitting to the relationship on The Howard Stern Show.
You dated him?
Yes, I did.
Aha!
So when did Dave Coulier, when did you start dating him? I was 19.
19.
I was singing at an all-star hockey game. I was doing the national anthem, and he was playing.
They would date for 2 years, during which Alanis was recording and promoting her second album. Now Is the Time came out on October 20th, 1992, and while it would go on to sell 50,000 copies, the album was considered a flop. The music was more of the same dance pop as her debut, and it failed to produce a hit. After expressing that she wanted to pursue a new direction with her music, Alanis was dropped by MCA. The label told her no one wanted to hear her evolve as an artist. Can you imagine now being the person that said that to her? You were so wrong. That's so embarrassing for you. But it wouldn't take long for her to meet her future manager, Scott Welsh, who convinced her to move out of her parents' home after graduating from high school and head to Toronto. But it wouldn't take long for her to realize that it was actually Los Angeles that was the place she needed to be. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Alanis said leaving MCA was what she needed at the time. It was kind of a blessing that it was over because I wanted to start out with a clean slate, not only personally, but career-wise too. It left me sort of naked. Leaving Toronto to go to LA gave me a severe dose of disillusionment that was really necessary. I was finally in a position where things weren't working out, and it was good for me. It made me realize that certain people I'd blindly trusted let me down. My intuition was saying, don't trust these people, don't work with these people, and I went against it. Alanis found herself without a record deal in a different city. At first, she was sleeping on friends' couches and experienced a sort of baptism by fire when she arrived. She would tell Rolling Stone, "I was held up at gunpoint in Hollywood when I first moved there. Still, despite all the negatives, it was like in hand in my pocket. I was broke, but I was happy." But it was in LA that she found a kindred spirit in fellow songwriter Glenn Ballard, who was originally suggested as a collaborator when she first signed with MCA. Here is Alanis telling Much Music about partnering up with him.
I had written with over 100 people over the last 3 years, and I became really disheartened with the whole collaborative process. And then MCA Publishing, which is the company I'm on and the one that he's on, set us up and just, threw us out there. And we got together. I knew immediately that there was a real synergy and magic between us, and sure enough, right, we tapped into it.
Glenn encouraged her to find herself by forgetting the past and following a new, more authentic direction. It also helped that he had an impressive track record, having worked with Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Paul Abdul, and Wilson Phillips. Alanis would tell CNN, "I thought, wow, here's someone I can delve into some subject matters that may offend or trigger or bother some other collaborators." Glenn was embracing it, and he was saying, "Keep on, let's do it." Glenn helped Alanis unlock the frustration and anger she was harboring from previous relationships, be it with her record label, management, or love interests. Although she came to LA with close to 50 songs, the two of them set a challenge to try and write one song a day, which would last anywhere from 12 to 16 hours. They would then record the songs at Glenn's home studio. The pair were so focused that the only real distraction came from the police chasing O.J. Simpson in a white Ford Bronco around their neighborhood. But I mean, that would have distracted anyone. Since Glenn could play almost any instrument, they didn't feel like they needed to bring anyone else in at first. The majority of the album was put together in just 13 days with the help of engineer Christopher Fogel. According to Glenn, all of Alanis' vocals were done in only 1 or 2 takes. Man, she is impressive. While they were finishing the album, Alanis and Glenn shopped her music around to various labels. Every one of them passed on it, except for Maverick Records, or as people knew it, Madonna's record label. Madonna launched Maverick in 1992 and quickly found success with the post-grunge band Candlebox. Like its name suggested, her label was just the sort of venture that could take a chance on an artist like Alanis. Madonna would admit that it was Alanis' honesty, pain, and hopefulness that sold her on the music. But the key player at the label was a young A&R guy named Guy Osieri, who was just a few years older than Alanis. Guy was completely unfamiliar with Alanis' past and connected with the angst-driven rock. Fun fact about Guy Osieri, he later became Madonna's manager and is now the manager of U2. What a life. When they went into Maverick's office to play some music, Alanis wore the only clothes she had on her, a t-shirt and some sweatpants. It didn't matter, though. She and Glenn played the label You Oughta Know, but surprisingly enough, it was the ballad Perfect that impressed him most. In the Jagged documentary, Guy would admit, within 30 seconds, everything changed. I was already floored. I had not heard anything like it. The simplicity of the way she was able to narrate, yet how complex it was at the same time. I said, I'm in. I didn't have to hear any more. I love it. I'm all in. As they finished the album, Madonna, who Alanis would describe as very supportive and very nurturing, would come in and give her opinion. One day, she also gave Alanis an expensive chartreuse Prada blouse to try and class up her wardrobe. Maverick had some suggestions for the music, but the only feedback that seemed to matter was that You Oughta Know needed a bit of a boost. So Guy called up his friends Flea and Dave Navarro, then of Red Hot Chili Peppers, to bolster the bass and guitar on the song to make it more of a rocker. After the album was finished, the next step was to try and convince the world that she was no longer some pop princess. She was a future Grammy winner in the making.
The last thing Canadians saw of me was when I was 17 years old, and then 4 years later they hear this, and for them that must have felt like 5 minutes. And I understand how different it can seem, but no one was walking alongside me for those 4 years and seeing what I saw and learning what I learned. So those that have the incentive and the curiosity to find out what happened in the last 5 years for me, they'll have those questions answered through the music and through me.
Come 1995, in Canada, the name Alanis was still synonymous with the big-haired teenage girl that had a top 40 hit just a few years earlier. Her past life was still too fresh to convince music lovers and radio programmers in her home country that she was now some grungy singer-songwriter. But as soon as they heard the first single, You Oughta Know, preconceived notions had changed. Once K-Rock FM in Los Angeles began playing the song, other stations followed suit. MTV and Much Music picked up the video and put it in rotation immediately. The song's provocative lyrics played out like a revenge fantasy from a scorned lover, uninhibited and unapologetic, and unlike anything else on the radio at the time. One line in particular found Alanis asking, "Would he go down on you in a theater?" Here she is talking to Much Music about how important it was to show that side of her.
You have laid yourself bare here lyrically too,
Yeah.
Would she go down on you in a theater?
Yeah, I mean, for about a week or so, I expressed my fear with, I guess, how forthright everything was to Glenn, my collaborator, and he and I talked about it, and I talked myself out of being afraid of being that honest, because I guess the alternative was to censor things and to tell half-truths.
Yeah.
And I vowed to myself that I'd never do that again.
Of course, that one lyric being so shocking helped spark a decades-long obsession with the identity of the man she was singing to in You Oughta Know. When word got around that Alanis had dated Dave Coulier, immediately people put two and two together and assumed it was about Joey from Full House. Years later, Coulier would recount to SiriusXM his first reaction to hearing You Oughta Know on the radio.
Here's the story. I'm driving in Detroit, and I've got my radio on, and I hear the hook for You Oughta Know come on the radio, and I'm like, wow, this is a really cool hook. And then I start hearing the voice. I'm like, wow, this girl can sing. And I had no idea, that this was the record. And
that gave someone a cross.
And then I was like, I'm listening to the lyrics going, ooh, oh no. Oh, I can't be this guy. And I went to the record store, bought the CD, and I went and I parked on a street and I listened to the whole record, and there was a lot of familiar stuff in there that her and I had talked about, like your shake is like a fish. I'd go, hey, dead fish me, and we'd do this dead fish handshake. And so I started listening to it, and I thought, ooh, I think I may have really hurt this woman. And that was my first thought. And so years later, we reconnected, and she couldn't have been sweeter. And I said, what do you want me to say when people ask me about this relationship? And she said, you can say whatever you want.
Of course, to this day, Alanis has never revealed who the song was actually about. And when she appeared on Watch What Happens Live years later, she said she would never reveal the truth.
And Alanis and Julia, thank you so much for making my teenage years so memorable. Alanis, how sick are you of people asking if You Oughta Know is about Uncle Joey from Full House? And will you ever...
Good question.
And will you ever reveal it as part two?
No revealing, but I am intrigued at the thought that or at the fact that more than one person has taken credit for it. And I'm thinking, I don't know if you want to take credit for being the person I wrote You Ought to Know.
Right. Actually, he was on this show, and I feel like he kind of took credit for it on this show. Like,
There's
feel like
about 6 people that have taken credit for it. And I just think, if you're going to take credit for a song where I'm singing about someone being a douche or an asshole, you might not want to. Right. Yeah, you might not want to say, "Hey, that's me."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
When it was released on June 13th, 1995, Alanis' third album, Jagged Little Pill, obliterated any expectations that the label had for it. You Ought to Know was rapidly climbing up the charts all over the world, but especially making an impact in America. When it reached number 1 on the Billboard Modern Rock Tracks chart, she became the first woman to ever achieve that, and it would be the first of many achievements for her. In interviews, Alanis referred to Jagged Little Pill as her debut album in a bid to forget her past and start her career with a clean slate. It really is her debut album, though, if you think about it, because this is the one that wasn't influenced by a bunch of old pervs telling her what to be and that she needs to lose weight. Anyway, when she was asked by Rolling Stone about the first 2 albums, she said, "I'm not scared people might hear those records. There's nothing I regret. Maybe people will just understand my lyrics now a little more if they hear those records. It validates this record. There was an element of me not being who I really was at the time. It was because I wasn't prepared to open up that way. The focus for me then was entertaining people as opposed to sharing any revelations I had at the time. I had them, but I wasn't prepared to share." But to be honest, most people didn't care that she used to be Canada's Debbie Gibson. Alanis Morisette, as she's now known, was a take-no-shit alternative rock star who was purging all of these raw feelings and emotions that so many girls and women could relate to. She was quickly becoming the voice of her generation at a time in which she believed there was, quote, an abject hatred of women. Yeah, it was just at that time. Naturally, with all of this praise and success, the press would paint Alanis as an angry white female. That's what Rolling Stone called her when they put her on the front cover in November 1995. Here is Alanis reflecting to iHeartRadio on what it was like to be a woman in 1995.
I think for me, it was more about the 90s was very insulated and isolating in terms of being a woman in a very, very patriarchal environment. So if I could have done anything differently, I would have made patriarchy go away so I could have had more people around me who were supportive. I'm like, that's happening now, so we're good.
One of the most fascinating things about Jagged Little Pill is how it just kept getting bigger and bigger and selling more and more copies. Most albums generate 1 or 2 hits, but each single from Jagged Little Pill was a banger. After You Ought to Know came You Learn, then Hand in My Pocket, and then on February 27th, 1996, 8.5 months after the album was released, the 4th single dropped. It was called Ironic, and it was far different from the other songs on the album. The song was not self-confessional or autobiographical the way the rest of the songs were. Instead, Alanis and Glenn built a tapestry of relatable, unlucky situations in which irony reared its ugly head. For example, Rain on Your Wedding Day, or 10,000 Spoons When All You Need Is a Knife. In 2015, Glenn would explain the song's origin in a Spotify Landmark session, saying, "Our process began with a lunch at Emilio's Trattoria over chopped salads and iced tea. I recalled her saying something like, 'Wouldn't it be ironic for an old man to win the lottery and die the next day?' We were fresh with this thought when we walked into the studio 10 minutes later. This was the beginning of the true magic between us." Ironic was one of the first songs the duo wrote, initially just as a demo to get things started. Alanis and Glenn were just looking to have some fun, bouncing words off each other and even questioning what type of genre they were working in. But the two of them weren't actually running their ideas through an irony authenticator. So, while the song became a hit, critics had just a field day pointing out which lines weren't ironic by definition and misusing the word. It didn't really matter in the end because Ironic reached more listeners, spanning more radio formats than You Ought to Know, thanks to its lighter, folkier pop sound. And singing a song about things that are ironic that aren't actually ironic. Isn't that ironic? Don't you think? Ironic was one of 4 singles from Jagged Little Pill to top the charts in Canada, but it was also the highest charting single for Alanis in the US, reaching number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. A lot of its success was the result of a charming video directed by Stefan Sednaoui, in which we saw 4 different Alanises singing Ironic as they travel in a 1978 Lincoln Continental Mark V along a snowy road. Each Alanis clone represented a free spirit dressed in a different thrift shop purchased outfit to distinguish them from one another. Alanis would tell Vogue the clothes were chosen to suit the cold weather. I'm always moved by incredible colors, rich, muted, and what they can tell us about where we are at any given moment. She elaborated that the driver is the responsible one. The spunky one in yellow with braids is the quirkster, the one in the passenger seat who hangs out the window is the romantic, and the one in the back seat wearing green and banging her head is the troublemaker. The Ironic music video would win 3 of the 6 categories it was nominated for at the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards: Best Female Video, Best New Artist in a Video, and Best Editing. The video for Ironic would be subjected to numerous parodies, including Weird Al Yankovic and Toronto indie band Rusty, who recreated it for their song Empty Cell. Ironic truly is iconic. Not bad for a song Alanis didn't even want on the album. Did I mention that? Because it's true. When she appeared on Rolling Stone's Music Now podcast, Alanis admitted, "I didn't even want it on the album, and I remember a lot of people going, please, 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 so I said okay." People wound up really liking the melody, and I wasn't that precious about it. Instead, it was Glenn who insisted on adding it to Jagged Little Pill. Alanis said she did come around to the song over time, though, admitting to Spotify, "I do love it, though. You know, when I perform it, there's such a resonant, precious moment with the audience when we start playing that song." Just how big was Ironic for Alanis Morissette? Well, on top of helping her sell more than 33 million copies of Jagged Little Pill and it being part of a Broadway musical, the song may have actually changed the English language. Here she is on The Howard Stern Show explaining how all of the confusion over her song actually led to redefining the word ironic.
Ironic is funny because you still get shit to this day because everyone goes, "Hey, Alanis, that's not real irony in the song." But you were like, "Hey, I'm 19. I'm just trying to come up with a song." Well, right? Is that it?
Glenn and I were trying to make each other laugh. And I also think at the time, there's a part of me that's quite aware that I'm very stupid. Very, very dumb.
You didn't know the definition of ironic. Most people don't.
And then there's another part of me that's really smart. I did not care. I honestly thought maybe 100 people would hear this song.
Right.
Malapropisms, what are you going to do?
Right.
But interestingly enough, the dictionary, actually, this kills me about pop culture. The dictionary changed the definition based on, I can't say singularly on me, but I think based on people being so confused about the definition of irony. And I am usually a stickler for grammar, so it was a step out for me.
Not too many songwriters can flex like that. Ironic has been covered by almost too many people to name, but the most memorable of all was by Alanis herself when she appeared on The Late Late Show in 2015 and sang an updated version of Ironic with James Corden. Here are some of the examples of those new lyrics. So we had, "An old friend sends you a Facebook request, and you only find out they're racist after you accept." That's a classic. There's a traffic jam when you tried to use Waze. And how about, "It's like Netflix, but you own DVDs. It's a free ride, but your Uber's down the street." So pretty funny. I like that she can have some fun with it. James Corden must be a huge fan too, because he also sang Ironic when he invited Justin Bieber to join him for carpool karaoke. Ironic is hands down Alanis' biggest song of her career, with close to 600 million streams on Spotify and another 300 million views on the iconic video. And speaking of that video, in 2024, Alanis teamed up with US Cellular to recreate the music video in an attempt to help people build healthier relationships with technology. Check it out.
Our phones were made to help us connect, and somehow they've made us less connected, which is ironic. Don't you think? Phone-free dinner.
But the menu's on the phone.
Ironic. We can't watch something without also watching something else. Post about cuteness and miss the even cuterness. Ironic.
And Alanis wasn't the only one reenacting the Ironic music video. Olivia Rodrigo, who inducted Alanis Morissette into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2022, paid homage to her hero by adding a car sequence to the video from her hit song Get Him Back. At the induction ceremony, Olivia had this to say about Alanis. My life was completely changed after hearing Jagged Little Pill. Alanis' songwriting was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, and I haven't heard anything quite like it since. And that voice, fierce and tender and sometimes funny and playful, I became hooked for life. Same, Olivia, same. Well, that's it for another episode of Encore. I hope it wasn't like rain on your wedding day. I'm Ruby Carr. New episodes of Encore every Thursday.
Encore is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Download the free iHeartRadio app and subscribe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.